Welcome to In Collaboration With, a conversation series from the Teaching Cooperative Writing Collab about craft, culture, publishing, and community. I'm Brian Gresko here in my studio in Brooklyn, and today I'm talking with Matt Ortile. Matt is a writer and editor who has taught for a variety of incredible organizations, including our friends at Poets and Writers, Off Assignment, and Kundiman, as well as Writing Collab. He is the author of the essay collection The Groom Will Keep His Name, and a co-editor of the anthology Body Language, Writers on Identity, Physicality, and Making Space for Ourselves. Matt is the second guest in a row who I can say that I first crossed paths with at the Catapult offices, where Matt was an executive editor of Catapult's literary magazine. More recently, he has been an editor for Condé Nast Traveler, and today we will be talking about traveling, writing, and the intersection of the two. Matt, bonjour. Where in the world are you calling from today?
Bonjour. I'm calling from my home in Paris. I moved here 2 months ago and I finally got internet access today.
Matt, you and I have talked over vermouth before about our mutual love of travel. So when I was a kid, I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and so vacations meant just one thing every year. It was a week at the Jersey Shore. What about you? What were your first travel experiences, and when did you know that you had the bug for traveling?
Just similarly to you, Brian, when I was growing up in Las Vegas, I had moved from the Philippines. So every summer vacation was largely spent in the Philippines with that part of my family, that side of my family. So for a very long time, any summer vacation, holiday, long weekend, it was either I stayed home or I would go to the Philippines. And only in my adulthood did I actually take, PTO, paid time off, and vacation days to travel in a place that was not the United States or the Philippines. So, funnily enough, my very first international trip did include Paris in 2016. It was only then that I got the bug. I think for a long time, I think I operated on the idea that, oh, as an immigrant to the United States, I'm kind of already traveling. And so I don't really need to. And it was this weird excuse, I think, that I told myself to sort of give permission to maybe not necessarily the lack of a curiosity about the world beyond the United States, but maybe there's actually maybe something there that I've yet to unpack about how I felt obliged to stick to America, only know about America, only love America as an immigrant who had come from abroad. And so now, as sort of an immigrant twice over, a Filipino American living in Paris, there are some threads that I'm starting to untangle there.
Do you ever return to places that you especially love to visit, or are you the kind of traveler who prefers to strike out someplace new?
For me, I'm definitely a proponent of visiting again and again because you just start to, get into try to get as much as you can under the skin of the place. It feels, I think, very writerly, actually, to visit a place again and again, to study it in different time periods, in different seasons, in different, moods. And, you in Vienna at 21 is different from you in Vienna at 34, at 45, at 62. So I think it's worthwhile to visit different places because you are also in a different place in your own life each time you go somewhere.
I love that. I'm feeling that myself. I think for me, yeah, my first travel solo was Spain. And then when my spouse and I married, I was like, honey, we have to go to a honeymoon in Spain. And then we just more recently went back with our son, who was conceived in Spain, and went back to southern Spain. So it's been really cool to have this relationship with this place that has grown as I've grown.
You've made a great point, Brian. We change, but and also the places change. They don't stay static. They're not the same as they were in 1994 versus 2011 versus 2026. So I definitely, because that place is going to be new each time you go. So it's interesting, and I think in travel writing, or at least in travel media and travel journalism, it behooves someone who kind of wants to make their way in that space to not necessarily develop an expertise, but like a really strong familiarity. I mean, it's hard to develop an expertise in anything. At what point do you consider yourself an expert? That's an open-ended question. But I think the more that you can have a level of fluency to a place and its culture and its language and its customs and do it all with respect, I think that takes time and more than just one visit, more than just 72 hours in the touristy part of insert place here.
I mean, when I think back to the first time that I traveled internationally was which was to go to London and I was in college. I not having had a lot of that really experience traveling internationally and traveling on my own, the things that kind of gave me the inspiration of how to think about myself as a traveler was actually the reading that I had done before. Were you reading, were you like was reading about place and reading about people traveling something that was always of interest to you?
It was. In a sort of in a sort of slanted way, I would say, because I was a kid who grew up on fantasy novels, and I think those kinds of books are, this is kind of part and parcel of the genre. It's a way to travel, to escape the mundane, to escape the familiar, to go into these extraordinary, new to you environments. So maybe that's how I first started traveling. But funnily enough, the more explicit travel connection in my youth was not necessarily books, but it was through television. I remember thinking about this a lot actually when I was applying for my job at Condé Nast Traveler. I used to think that whenever someone had asked me when I was growing up, what do you want to be as an adult? I said, I would say writer, but before that it was actor. But really before that, it was travel show host, shows on CNN or National Geographic or even the Travel Channel, and these things were actually about travel, and you just kind of like had these no name people, not to be weird, but or mean, but like these were like not celebrities hosting these travel shows and kind of taking you to these, you're traveling from your couch. And weirdly, the kind of the literary in terms of just like letters, the thing that I would read in terms of preparing for travel was hotel reviews. I kind of got into the travel writing world through as a points and miles hobbyist, actually. So credit card points and airline miles. I was a big collector and still am. And I would use it to redeem kind of like aspirational stays and flights, business class, first class, five-star hotels for next to no money because you were paying with points. I would say, oh, this is a hotel that's worth staying at or where I can redeem my points. And how I would determine that was through reading the reviews. So that kind of definitely connected to my career that unfolded at Condé Nast Traveler and that I'm pursuing now as a freelance travel writer. But I think one of my favorite books, just going to bring it back to the original question, one of my favorite books that I was reading, the New Yorker staff writer Lauren Collins, she wrote her first book, a memoir called When in French. And it was about moving to Europe, particularly to Geneva, but then learning French. And then at the end of the book, she moves to France. She moves to Paris, where she now lives. And reading that and learning about the idiosyncrasies of the language and how that maybe diagnosed the particularities of French culture and French attitudes, I thought was very, very interesting. That was a book that I think that prepped me for a little bit for France and just travel broadly, how language and culture connect.
I mean, I have a big existential question for you, which is like, what is travel writing? Like, what's the difference between a writer who travels and writes about it and a travel writer?
And thank you for the setup, Brian, because that's something actually that we talk about in one of my classes that I teach for a writing collab, the art of travel writing. What I tell my students is that at its most base, travel writing is about bringing a particular place to life, whether that's one aspect or multiple, the cuisine, the culture, the language, the music, the art, the people, the craft traditions, just like giving a true, not true, but the sense, the destination filtered through the lens of one particular writer. And I think it's imperative because that the narrator or the writer narrator, hand the mic over figuratively to the locals. Because, when we, as writers, there is this level of agency that we get to tell the story quite literally. But, if you are someone who, say, is reporting on the ground currently in Gaza, like there is very much like, you know, there is a position of power and there is a position of like lacking in power. And so this tension I'm very conscious of in travel writing, knowing that its roots really come from, colonial origins. It's like the very George Orwell of it all, like British Empire, like the travelogue of like white man goes into the heart of the jungle, the heart of darkness, kind of Joseph Conrad of it all. And it it privileges a certain point of view. It privileges a certain class. It privileges a certain race, sexuality, and gender. So I think it's interesting to see how these tensions play out when a thoughtful writer is grappling with it, using being very conscious of their position in a place that is maybe familiar to them, maybe that they have access to. We have a lot of sort of travel writers who will be like, oh, Korean American writer goes back to Seoul to figure out, X, Y, and Z, or to better understand the roots of the global domination of K-pop. That's actually fully just templated off of an R.O. Kwan feature that was published in Condé Nast Traveler earlier this year. And so I think that's what travel writing is. It ultimately deals with the writer narrator and uses their point of view, uses their access, uses their thinking, but ultimately in service of better depicting, understanding, untangling, offering a new angle or sort of picture, an additive picture rather than supplanting some other thesis on a place. Like it adds yet another take on Seoul, on Paris, on New York, on Oaxaca. Like, so I think that's what travel writing ultimately wants to do. I think that's the best kind of travel writing. And I make this distinction between a first person travel essay versus a personal essay about or involving travel. I think in the latter shape or form or genre, a personal essay about travel is ultimately a personal essay. It privileges narrators' personal state, kind of who they are, what they're kind of trying to unpack for themselves. And the travel is a tool to that. A piece about me grieving my mother in Rome when I couldn't visit Manila during the pandemic where she died, and thinking about all the memories we had in Rome because we traveled there together. It's not necessarily offering the reader a better picture on what Rome is. Maybe it's enlightening them on what travel can do for the soul, but ultimately it really is more about matter to you later writer. So I think that is a slippery distinction that I try to draw for my students and with my students, but ultimately it may not matter. Good writing is good writing. But I think if you are an adjudicator for some award for travel writing, I think you're more interested in learning about the place rather than the person telling the story.
I love it. Thank you. That's yeah, no, because I've been thinking because it is and creative nonfiction is it's an expansive essays just want to expand and eat, and genre is very gooey. So absolutely, I just finished even the novel Taipei Story by R.F. Kuang, which is coming out in the fall, and very much a coming of age story, and yet at the same time, because it's set in Taiwan and has a Chinese American character in Taiwan, it has that kind of travel narrative stuff that's happening to it, right? And for early memory for me would be like Hemingway's like A Movable Feast or Sun Also Rises, which which are not travel books per se, and yet travel happens in them, and so they do open up some views onto the place.
To your point, I mean, I'm reading Movable. I mean, among many books that I'm reading right now that I'm in the middle of, Movable Feast is one of them, of course, because it details his years in Paris in the 20s. So for him, it's travel, right? But also it's living. It's a memoir of his time here in Paris. Um, you know, the it the story goes that like the papers were put together, like these memoirs were found in an old Louis Vuitton trunk that he had left at the Ritz Hotel for ages, and they had called him up and they were like, "Mr. Hemingway, you need to pick this up." And then that kind of inspired him to like kind of put the notes together. And so like it's not exactly because he's a stranger in the land, but he also is navigating it with such deftness and like with a community that he's a part of. So he's not outsider in certain ways. But it's interesting where like, let's say a piece about, Brazil, about going to Rio is and like talking about the food or like the scenes at the beach and the music, like that can be travel for someone who is not familiar with Brazil, who is from someplace else. But to say a Brazilian reader who just happens to read that same piece and maybe they're reading in that same language too, is that travel for them? Because like travel supposes like an other, like the place is other, but also the narrator is other. And then what happens then if you are, let's say, you're reading R.F. Kuang's new book, and it's part of it is set in Taipei, and you're a Taiwanese person living in Taipei, and you're like, is that travel writing to you? So I think to your point, like genre is so gooey, and there's something interesting about travel that it inherently has this other these other factors, capital O other factors about it.
So, what brought you to Paris? And I know that, like, in terms of relocating to Paris, because it's fascinating to hear about like your kind of love affair over the years, but to then go from I like to visit Paris once a year to I want to live there is so different. And I also I know it's not been long, but you have had a long relationship with Paris. So I'm also just curious about what have you noticed that's different about literary culture in France and in Paris as opposed to America and New York City.
So I'll start with the differences in the literary scene. And I'll have to say that I'm not yet so rooted in it just yet. But it's funny because on July 4th, it felt very New York in that, oh, I'm going to this thing where there's a scene and I know the people and there's an open mic. And so it was this July 4th thing. It was like an afternoon of programming around American and English language literature. It was at this barge on the Seine, what they call a peniche. It's actually, funnily enough, right below technically because it's on the Seine, and then above, kind of like above it and a few feet away is Shakespeare and Company. But on the Quai de Montebello is this peniche that's called Nana. I don't know why it's called Nana, but it has a bar upstairs, and then downstairs in the kind of the belly of the barge is this lending library of books in both French and English, and very big on like author events and DJ sets. And for the afternoon, there was this like kind of Fourth of July American and English language talks and panels and things, and there was an open mic. And it just, I bring it up to say, it felt just like being in New York anyway. Like, okay, great, we're going to Housing Works in Soho, and I'm going to see Joe Osmondson and Dan Michelle Norris, and like friends, and and oh, who's going to read? Oh, okay, great. What are you going to do with your 3 minutes? Oh, you're definitely going to go over. And I was like, this is the same thing. I think maybe it feels a little bit further away from the center of gravity because obviously, people come to New York to be in that center of gravity, to be really so close to the pulse of it. Agents are there, editors are there, the publishers are there. So many different writers, so many author events, just so many festivals and learning institutions. Places like the Center for Fiction or Asian American Writers Workshop. It's and there's some of that here too, and so many are there's an American library in Paris, and I'm like, oh, I should maybe look into a membership there to browse through the archives. And it's a good co-working space apparently, and I believe they have air conditioning, which I'm really hopeful they do, because it's a rare thing. So I don't know quite yet the major differences, but funnily enough, it feels very familiar. Um, And I wonder if part of it is that what part of the root cause is that there has always been this kind of Franco-American literary exchange for over a century, back to like Baldwin's days in the mid-century, back to Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Stein in the 20s, to even before then, but not just in literature, but in art and music and to a degree sciences. And so it's it feels I've been saying a lot that New York and Paris are like cousins. The energy feels so familiar. So it's not quite a drastic change just yet. I still very much love New York, absolutely. And I think now is like the best New York has ever been with, after just still on the high of the Knicks winning, of just Mamdani's, waves of change in the city and this amazing summer energy that's going on in New York right now. I still very much love the city, but circumstances in my career led me to think, okay, I'm ready to go solo. I've been on the editor's side on staff somewhere so my brief history has been, Condé Nast Traveler for about 3 years, Catapult for nearly five. I was at BuzzFeed News for four, and then right before that was school. So I've always been in the editor's chair while also writing my own stuff on the side. But I felt time like, okay, I really need to, if I want to make headway on like this illustrious career that I've planned for myself, I need to actually like carve out space and bandwidth and time and energy for the books, for more of my own magazine writing, for more of my own essays and fiction. And I didn't quite see how that could all fit into the picture with a full-time job. So I said, okay, going freelance. Freelance in New York is hard. I'm going to go somewhere where, and this is a pretty political thing about it. And it's something I think that a lot of Americans in Paris maybe don't often or neglect to own and kind of declare. But, if you are an expat or an immigrant, whichever of those terms you prefer, I'd like to say immigrant for myself. But I'm someone who, in theory, is earning in American dollars. And those rates that US magazines pay are much higher than what European or British publications pay. I can say that living in Paris is comparatively cheaper because I'm earning, contracts that European writers may not make, and but also at the same time, New York is so expensive, and just compared to Paris, it's a completely different ballgame. What I'm most excited about being here is having the healthcare. Because as a freelancer in New York, you need to have to buy your healthcare, and that basically covers nothing. But here, I have healthcare through my visa. I'm part of the social security system here, and I can go to, an emergency room, and it'll cost me maybe at most $50, $100, if that. So between living costs, healthcare, wanting to improve my French, having a community here already that I've built over, as you've described it, my love affair over the last 10 years, and being a travel writer based in Paris, kind of like a logistical nitty gritty thing. The PR companies and the hotels and the clients are all much more willing to fly you to Vienna, to Athens, to Copenhagen when you're just like, a 2 hour EasyJet or Ryanair flight away, but I'll still insist on Air France. So all these factors really led me to like, okay, obviously it's staring me right in the face. You're moving to Paris. And I have. It's kind of wild.
I love it. Well, final question for you, which is just, you just want to like preview, you've got a really cool reading Paris class that's coming up. By the time this airs, it'll be in just like a couple weeks. So, yeah, tell me about that. It sounds like you're already preparing for it if you're reading all these books set in Paris.
So it's a reading club, and it's 4 weeks in August. You can sign up for just one session or all four, or maybe two or just three. Um, all the fiction, nonfiction, and poetry that we're reading is going to be in some way or form, shape or form, about Paris. And, I was thinking about it and just like for me, I wanted to give myself a little bit of this reading assignment and said, why don't I take people on the journey with me? I think it's really feels very summery to sort of like be able to travel from your couch. And I think what's really exciting is that there are so many opportunities to interface with all of these texts beyond just reading them. So let's say one example actually is A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway, and then this companion essay that I'm pairing it with for the first week of the course. I called what is it? I called it like Paris in the 1920s. A century ago, Paris in the 1920s. So there's this essay by Janet Malcolm in the New Yorker that talks a little bit about Hemingway, and because she was part of that whole coterie of Americans in Paris at that time, and so she name checks so many different places that are actually still in existence today. And the last course is what I'm calling A Century Later, Paris in the 2020s. So it's a novel by a woman named Siné Lemoine. The book is called The Margot Affair. It's a really, really fun, exciting, kind of very propulsive novel. It's a little bit based on political intrigue and drama, and it's like narrated by a young teenager. So I guess in a way it is fun, but also like pretty serious. That's a living writer now who is French American and mixed race French American. I believe she's currently based in New York, but is back and forth between Paris as well and France. And so there possibly might be an author visit there. I have to check with Sine's schedule. And so all to say, like, it's a living thing, this kind of history that can feel so fantasized about, writing in Paris. And so to that end, one thing that I'm so excited that you're game for, Brian, is to, think about what a writing retreat, like another retreat of with writing collab branded retreat might look like in the middle of Paris, where we might visit, Maxime's, which, has been around since the Belle Epoque era, or, dine at Café de Flore or Brasserie Leap, these kinds of like iconic addresses, and who are the American writers that the group might meet here when they visit in 2027. So the people who sign up and participate in the reading club this August will get priority access to spots in the workshop / retreat in 2027. So that's something that we're cooking up, and I'm so excited that we can just kind of dream big and see what happens.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so excited, and yeah, I love Sine and Sine's work, and that's really cool. And yeah, I just also just love hearing about the community that's outside of New York City,
Totally.
of which there are all over the world literary communities. But yes, absolutely, Paris, such a history. It's so incredible, and now you are there, and that's just so
Yeah.
fantastic. So yeah, merci beaucoup, Matt. Thank you so much,
Merci.
and apologies for my awful French.
No, no, you're fine. Please, you speak more French than most Americans do already.
Thank you. In Collaboration With is brought to you by the Teaching Cooperative Writing Collab, an artist-owned and run organization which provides online classes, workshops, accountability groups, and other community programs like retreats. Our fall classes are now available with offerings for fiction writers, creative nonfiction, poetry, and translation. You can find us at writingcolab.com. That's writingco-lab.com to learn more and subscribe to our newsletter. We are also on Substack and Instagram. Matt is on Instagram as well. Connect, find us. I'm Brian Gresko, sending creative vibes your way. Thank you so much for listening.